Something very different and unusual happened to me today whenever I got home from work. Basically, I got home this afternoon, and for the first time in a long time, I looked at my schedule and realized I didn't have anything planned. If you know anything about me, I'm a guy who likes to keep myself busy, and I'm usually pretty good at doing just that, and I'm not really a person who likes a whole lot of free time because there's so many different things I want to do. But for the first time, I got home and I realized I had free time on my hands. And so I did what I usually do. I read some books, I studied my Bible, I did all sorts of stuff like that. I got a little workout in. And since it was raining outside, there wasn't really a lot of stuff I could do outside. And due to the time change, it's dark so early anyways, that there wasn't much light to do anything anyways. And I realized, what am I going to do? So I pulled up my Cinemark app and I noticed that the movie Journey to Bethlehem had opened tonight. And I remember seeing the trailer for this movie a few months ago whenever it was first released, and I hadn't really been tracking anything since then, but I remember when I first saw that trailer, I thought it looked very interesting. And for those of y'all who don't know what Journey to Bethlehem is, basically, it is a live-action musical telling the nativity story, right? The story of the birth of Jesus, and it's basically just this really fun little Christmas movie that came out today, probably yesterday at the time you're watching this video. Or I don't know when you're watching this. You could be watching this weeks from now. But I remember seeing that trailer, and I remember being intrigued by it, and I had free time on my hands. It had opened tonight. And so what I decided to do is I decided to pick up a ticket, go watch the movie, went by myself, and I had a really good time. I actually had a much better time than I expected to have, and I wasn't planning on making this video, but whenever I got home, I said, you know what, I'm going to sit down. I want to talk about this movie, mainly because, like I said, I went and watched it by myself, and I want to talk to people about it. And so I figured I would talk to y'all, and hopefully once y'all have seen the movie, y'all can go down in the comments, and we can talk about this movie, because I thought it was very, very interesting, and I'm going to be interested to see how people respond to this movie. And so what I'm going to do in this, I'm not going to spoil anything in this video, because I want you to enjoy the movie just for face value as it is, but I do want to give you my initial thoughts. I want to talk about what I liked about the movie, some of the stuff I didn't like about the movie, and then I'll just wrap this up because why not? Future David cutting in real quick. I just wanted to make a quick correction in regards to something I'm going to say later on in the video. Multiple times throughout this video, I'm going to refer to Joel Smallbone's character as Herod Antipas. That is incorrect. Whenever I was watching the movie, I was accidentally combining Antipater II, Herod's firstborn son, with Herod Antipas, and I was kind of melding them together. I totally forgot that those are two different sons of Herod the Great. And so whenever I was watching the movie, I was mistakenly interpreting that character to be Herod Antipas, which is why later on in the video, I'm going to mention that there were certain issues that I had with the character and the direction they took him. Him being Antipater doesn't necessarily alleviate all of those issues, but it does elevate the character a little bit more in my mind. And so whenever I start talking about that guy and I start talking about some of the issues I had, just realize that I am mistakenly assuming that he's a different character in the Bible than he actually was. And so I just wanted to let you know about that, heads up, because that was just me being dumb. I apologize. Anyways, back to the review. All right, so like I said, Journey to Bethlehem is a 2023 film directed by Adam Anders, and it has a really fun cast, right? We got Fiona Paloma as Mary, the Virgin Mary. We have Milo Manheim as Joseph. We have Antonio Banderas, Puss in Boots, and Zorro himself as King Herod. We have Joel Smallbone as Herod Antipas, and we have Gino Seegers, Omid Jalili, and Rizwan Manji as the Three Wise Men. There's a lot of other people in the cast. Lecrae plays the Angel Gabriel and stuff like that. But that's really the main cast members that we have in this film. And like I said, I really enjoyed this movie. That being said, before we even get into the stuff that I did like, I do have to give you a heads up before you start blasting me in the comments. I'm aware that this movie takes a bunch of creative liberties whenever it comes to telling the nativity story, right? Just, you need to be aware of this going into the movie, right? So whether you've seen it or not, you need to be aware there are going to be a lot of creative liberties taken in this film. There's a bunch of added subplots, and the movie is not striving to be culturally accurate in the same way that we've kind of come to expect from things like whenever you watch the TV show The Chosen, right? Whenever The Chosen is telling things, it takes creative liberties and adds a lot of fictional subplots, but a lot of the subplots that they take in that show are intentionally taking steps in the direction of trying to teach you more about first century culture. That's not what this movie is doing, right? And it has no desire to do that, right? It does have really grandiose sets, and the sets, let me say, are beautiful, but it's not exactly going to be culturally accurate, right? And so don't go into the film expecting that, and don't go in there expecting it to be your typical Christmas story, right? This is very much, it's very much so a 21st century retelling of the story, where a lot of the plot points and stuff that you have added in there are told from a very 21st century perspective, and I am actually totally fine with that. If I were to actually draw a parallel to something, I would actually encourage you to think of the DreamWorks movie Prince of Egypt. I actually love Prince of Egypt, where I would actually argue that Prince of Egypt might very well be my favorite movie of all time. Right? It's an animated masterpiece. It is a musical, very much like this, and it's retelling a biblical story, just like this. But Prince of Egypt, if you've ever seen the movie, it's telling the story of Moses and the Exodus, and just like this movie, it takes a bunch of creative liberties in how it tells the story. And there's a lot of things that the Prince of Egypt movie does that we know for a fact is not culturally or historically accurate, but they adjust these things just for the sake of telling a more cohesive story that lends itself to the big screen, right? That's what they do in this movie, and so I just want you to be aware right off the bat that this is not going to be exactly how it won't be exactly how you imagine the story playing out, and it's not how the story actually did play out, right? There are certain things that the Bible doesn't tell us that you can kind of speculate on, but I can guarantee you that there's a lot of stuff that happens in this movie that just did not happen in real life, including all the choreographed dance numbers, right? But beyond that, there's a lot of stuff that they do change, and for me, that is not a problem. I know some people will have a problem with that, but I would encourage you to not, right? I would encourage you to go into this film expecting it to be different than what you would expect. They even have a disclaimer at the very end of the movie where they clarify that they were trying to be faithful to the story of the nativity story, but they did take a lot of creative liberties, right? So they're not saying that they are being faithful beat by beat to every single aspect of what the scripture says, but they are being faithful to the overall story, right? And so that, I think, is the important thing. Go into it being prepared to be gracious in that regard. I know I've spent too much time talking about this, but that's because I know that that's one place where Christians, like myself, right? Sometimes we can get kind of guarded up, and it ruins our enjoyment of something because we are demanding that this thing be something that it's not aiming to be, right? Let the movie stand on its own and try to just enjoy it. And then if you are kind of disturbed a little bit, not disturbed, if the creative liberties they take are so significant that it bothers you, I would actually use that as an opportunity to go back home with your families and read the actual biblical accounts and explain the differences so that you can just nuance it, right? So I think that that's actually a helpful thing, right? But overall, as somebody who is very passionate about the Bible and who is really passionate about biblical accuracy, I still went into the movie and fundamentally enjoyed it as it was, as a film that is trying to entertain you and tell a story of its own, right? Because it is a very different type of Christmas story. It's not one like you've really ever seen before. And so that all being said, let me break this down. I'm going to tell you about the things that I thought were great in the movie, the things that I thought were kind of mixed, and the things that I thought were a little bit questionable. And starting with the great stuff, first thing I have to mention, absolutely first thing, is the soundtrack and the lyrics behind the soundtrack. I am a big musical person. I have always loved musicals my entire life. In many ways, I like to think that my life is a musical. I know that y'all don't see this on the YouTube channel, but I'm the type of person who I will be hanging out with people, walking through the aisles of a grocery store, and then just randomly I will break into singing and dancing, and I'll just start improvising music and start dancing through the streets. This is just I love musicals, right? I'm a big fan of them. I love writing music myself, and I actually thought that the music in this film was great. There's a lot of modern musicals that I've seen where I've thought that the music was hit or miss, but I actually really enjoyed almost every single song in this movie, right? I actually, genuinely, as the songs were going on, usually the way that I gauge myself whenever I'm watching a musical is I'm asking myself, do I want the song to be over so we can move back to the plot, or do I want the song to keep going? And in almost every one of the songs, there were a few exceptions, but in almost every song in this film, I was wanting the song to keep on going because I was enjoying it so much. I really like the music in this film. And I think the reason why I like the music so much was not just because of the choreography, even though the choreography was great, and it's not just because of the instrumentals, and it wasn't just because of the beat, and it wasn't just because it was catchy, but it's because of the lyrics. If you know anything about me, I am a lyrics person through and through, right? My favorite musical artists are not my favorite musical artists because they are the best sounding. My favorite musical artists are the ones because they have the best lyrics, right? Whenever I write music, I pay more attention to lyrics than I do to anything else. That being said, I do think that the music in this film is very catchy and really well produced and stuff like that. But the lyrics are so clever and so well put together. And the way that they like the wordplay that they do in this is genius stuff. I thought whoever wrote the lyrics behind this, fantastic job. I thought they did a really good job behind this. And the way that the songs were able to capture nuanced aspects to how the characters were likely feeling as these events were unfolding were really good. This is actually something that I have also personally tried to capture whenever I write some songs. I really like writing songs that are exploring, maybe this is probably why it appealed to me so much. I like writing songs that tell a story. And whenever I write biblical songs, a lot of times I try to step into the mind of the characters, right? I try to use a little bit of sanctified imagination, as I like to call it, right? To where rather than just telling you what happened, I try to like there's one song I wrote where I'm telling you the story of Abraham, but I'm telling it from Abraham's perspective, right? They do a really good job of doing that in a lot of these songs, right? Where it's Joseph singing and he's trying to figure out how to handle the situation going on with Mary. And the way that they portrayed it, it was genius. It was great to where you can actually imagine this is probably how he did actually feel in this. And so I thought that just the lyrics behind this were fantastic. And above everything else in the film, I thought that the lyrics, the soundtrack, all of that was the best part. In addition to that, I also really like the vocal performances. Every person who sings in this film does a great job, to where there were times where I was just listening. I was like, wow, that person is it's got a great voice. And there'd be some times where, the person is acting and just talking and they haven't sung yet. And I was wondering, I wonder if they're going to sing. I wonder if they've got a good singing voice. And sure enough, they did. And so that was really good too, because, sometimes you have stuff like, the most recent like Les Mis movie, which came out a while back. But you'll have it to where like they prioritize the actor's acting abilities over singing chops. And it's very noticeable. But in this, they did a good job of both, right? To where you had good actors who were also good vocal performers as well. I thought that was great. That being said, the acting performances were really good. I would actually suggest that some of the acting performances were not as good as the vocal performances, but I couldn't tell if it was an issue with the acting or if it was an issue with just like the directing. And I'm not saying that it's an issue in a negative sense with the directing. It was more just, and sometimes you have to realize with musicals, things are going to be staged a little bit differently. And there were some times whenever the actors would respond to other characters in a different way than you would normally expect. And it was usually around the time period that the musical numbers are going on. And that was one place where I was trying to figure out whether or not it was the actors who were giving a weird performance or if it was just because they were in the middle of a musical number and therefore they were kind of reacting to each other in a different way. But I don't really think that's an issue with the film. I think it was me just kind of hyper analyzing things more than I was really supposed to. But that's just kind of something I ended up doing. And that being said, it didn't really distract me that much. It's just something I thought that was worth mentioning. But overall, the acting and the vocal performances were all really well done. Production design also great. It seems like lately with a lot of Christian movies and stuff, and probably just with technological advances and stuff, we've been able to accomplish more from a visual standpoint than ever before, right? To where like there's this one shot of Jerusalem at the very beginning of the film where I just looked at it, I was like, this is amazing. Like it's just such a beautiful shot. And then all the landscapes and stuff that they're traveling throughout this movie, great. So whoever was the set coordinator and the production design person and the person who was figuring out where to do all these shots and stuff did a fantastic job. I thought visually it was a really well-made movie. And there's a lot of little visual Easter eggs that they put throughout the movie too, where they'll do like little overhead shots that form certain symbols and just different things that I thought were really clever. And like all the lighting and stuff, it was very advanced and it was actually better produced than I was expecting going into it. And there was even visual effects, right? The visual effects were really good too, which if you just go back a few years, like it just shows you how far Christian movies have come, right? Where I don't know what the budget was behind all of this and stuff like that, but the visual effects were really well done to where this is a very visual effects heavy movie in certain aspects, but it flows very seamlessly, right? To where there are some like Marvel movies you see nowadays where like the CGI just like stands out like crazy, and it just looks horrible. Right? But in this movie, they managed to weave together the CGI and the visual effects and stuff in such a way to where it was never distracting, right? It actually just kind of flowed with it. To to where it was so good, in fact, that I was distracted by how good it was, because in a lot of Christian films, I have gone into it expecting it to be bad. And so I thought they did a really good job with that as well. And maybe to just cap all of this off when it comes to the really good stuff, because like I said, I don't want this video to be too long. This will highlight how much I appreciated this film. Even the Hebrew text that they had on screen was accurate. Because like I was just like, there'd be little different times wherever like you just have like a little glimpse of something in Hebrew. And you'd be able to read it. And I was like, like, that's so cool. Like even one of the last shots, like one of the last shots in the movie, I'm not going to spoil what it is, but you have somebody who's reading from a scroll, and you only see the shot for a little bit. And I just started scanning it, and it's just in Hebrew text. And I was wondering what it said. And like I said, I wasn't able to pause it. I was in a theater, but for the brief glimpse that I got, I just started reading it from the top line. And it's accurate Hebrew text that actually says stuff. And to me, I just think that's really good, because you could easily, like, I know I'm talking too long about this. You could easily, as a set designer and stuff like that, just put random Hebrew letters, and the majority of audience members are not going to know what it says. They're not going to know the difference. But the fact that they're willing to put in the effort to make it accurate tells me that they were willing to put in the work behind all this. And I just thought it was really, really well done. And so, all in all, I thought it was a really entertaining movie. So in regards to the great stuff, I thought the majority of this film was great, right? From the acting to the singing to the lyrics to the set design. They were very quaint set designs that really just felt like a good musical. Like even if you're not a Christian, I think you could go into this and enjoy it, because the messaging that there is there, it's not super overhand or heavy-handed, which I imagine that there's going to be some Christians who are going to actually be frustrated by that. I think that they're going to be frustrated by the fact that it wasn't a super heavy-handed message, but I don't think that the goal of this movie was to be strictly a, hey, let's make everybody a Christian movie. I think that they were just trying to tell an exciting story, right? That also happens to be Christian, and it's not like they're like hiding the Christian message or anything like that. They're not doing that. But it is chiefly story-focused rather than message-focused, which I actually think is a positive thing. And I think it's something that Christians need to, like, that Christian entertainment needs to focus on more, and I think that we are successfully doing that. Whereas if you went back like a decade, or even really like 5 years ago, a lot of Christian entertainment was very message-focused over story-focused, and I think it suffered as a result. I think that our entertainment needs to be story-focused first, and I think they did a very good job of that. That being said, let's talk about some of the mixed things that I had about this film, and there's really only two things that I have. The first one being the character of Herod Antipas, right? Antipater. I really liked him, right? Like, I'm not suggesting that his whole thing was bad, and I'm not even saying that what I'm about to talk about is bad. It's just mixed, right? I don't know how to feel quite about it. And I'm going to say this without spoiling anything, but there's something in particular, like really Herod Antipas was the character that I was probably enjoying the most the whole movie, just because of the complexity that they gave to him, which I thought was really intriguing. And there's something that they have him do at the very end of the movie, and once you see it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And I thought it was a very interesting way to take the story that changes a lot of things, right? And it's not that I have an issue with it. It was just very intriguing to me. That's why I'm putting it in the mixed category, right? I'm not suggesting this is bad. It was just very interesting to where even once I left and as I was driving home, I was still thinking about it, because I just thought it was an interesting, like, creative choice to take with that character. And then if you actually know the biblical story and you know the role that Herod Antipas plays later on in Jesus' life and stuff, and if you reflect a little bit more on the implications of that, it becomes even more interesting. And I don't know if the creators of this movie and stuff were like anticipating people to like do a deep dive into thinking about stuff like that. That's just naturally where my mind goes. And so, like I said, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I think I actually kind of liked it. It was just very intriguing to me to where I'm still kind of like just like tottering in the middle, where I thought that was weird. The second other mixed thing that I had was a little bit of the comedy that they laced in there with the Magi, like the wise men. Because the wise men in this film, there's a lot of comedy throughout the film, which I actually thought that most of the comedy landed. There were a few things that didn't land as well for me. But the Magi, for sure, are largely the comedic relief of the film, right? And I don't think that's really a plot twist or anything like that. That's not really a spoiler. But they are the like kind of the running joke throughout the whole film, is that these are very eccentric, kind of weird guys. And I think that might have kind of affected the overall messaging of the story to where like it just, to me, it took away from the like really, this is not a spoiler because it's all about the journey to Bethlehem. That's the name of the movie. A lot of the story is framed about the wise men making their way to Bethlehem. And because they were constantly the comedic relief, I think that it kind of might have made the final payoff not land as resonant as it should have, right? That being said, I think that if you're going there with your families, and if you're going there with kids especially, I think they're going to love the wise men, and they're going to think all the jokes are great. I just think that this is something for older audiences. I think some of their jokes might not land as much because they're a little bit heavy-handed. But for a family thing, I think the kids are going to love it. I think they're going to enjoy it. But for a dramatic payoff, I think that some of the comedic beats kind of take away from it because you don't really ever take these guys seriously. To where they don't like, I think because they're constantly the comedic payoff, you don't necessarily feel the reverence and respect for them that you should whenever you realize that these guys are coming to visit the baby Jesus, right? So I think that's one thing that kind of, it didn't lessen my appreciation of the movie. I really still love the movie, and I love the wise men as characters. I think it just comes from like a storytelling perspective. I wish that there were a few more moments throughout the movie where like you would have been able to appreciate who these guys were and what they were doing. Whereas really, in many ways, it almost feels like the Three Stooges who just happen to have a lot of money who are showing up to give stuff to Jesus, which I feel like that doesn't land quite as much as what the Bible's going for. But that's okay, right? Once again, it's their story to tell, and they're choosing to tell it in this own way, and I think that's totally fine. So I can't really gripe against the movie for it because it's just a creative choice for their story, right? I think that's okay. But I'm just telling you what I felt kind of mixed about, and I'd like to hear y'all's opinions about that too. So I told you the good, or the great. I've told you the mixed. And then there is really one thing, or really two things, I guess, that I did find questionable in the film, right? To where I would actually lean more towards the negative side of things in regards to this. Not overtly negative, because it eventually won me out in the end, but I did find it questionable. And really, the first thing of these two things is the characterizations of Mary and Joseph at the beginning of the film. Don't get me wrong, by the end of the film, I loved Mary and Joseph, and I was totally on board with it, but they definitely took a lot of creative liberties in regards to the characterization of, Mary and Joseph, especially at the beginning of the film. And to be fair, in the Bible, we don't know a lot about them, but what little things we do know about them from the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew and the beginning of Gospel Luke, it seems to run contrary to how they characterize Mary and Joseph in this. And once again, this is what I'm talking about whenever I say that this is very much a 21st century perspective of the nativity story, because the way that they characterize Mary and Joseph read like a very 21st century American, like young people perspective, less than it does a first century Jew, right? And so like looking at Mary here, to me, she felt very Disney princess-like, especially at the beginning of the film. And once you've seen it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Like the driving conflict that she is experiencing at the very beginning of the film felt very Disney princess-like. It didn't feel very Mother of the Messiah-like, to where if I was just looking at this woman right here, I don't know if I saw the type of character that would then lead God to choose her to be the mother of the Messiah, right? To where throughout the beginning of the film, you do have a lot of characters talking about how faithful Mary is and how she really does trust God, but you really don't actually get to see it, right? It's kind of one of those like things where they're telling, not showing, because the Mary that we do see, she seems like she's, I don't want to spoil anything, right? But it seems like she has these personal ambitions that are not like they're more self-focused than you would really expect from a person characterized like Mary in the scriptures, if that makes sense, right? And once again, that's okay, because guess what? Mary was not perfect, and I think it's good to demonstrate that she was not perfect. But I don't know if if the movie necessarily goes out of its way to really demonstrate the key flaw with her mindset at the beginning of the film, right? You do have like a dance number where people are kind of addressing it, but I don't know if she ever comes on board with that. You do have it kind of addressed at the very end of the film where she kind of like has this voiceover and kind of begins to explain things. But I don't know if the voiceover she says at the end of the film really justifies what was happening at the beginning. And once again, I'm trying to say all this without spoiling things, but hopefully once you see the film, you'll understand what I'm getting at. It just felt very Disney princess-like, and I didn't really like that, because when it comes to endearing yourself to the main character, whenever we were introduced to Mary, I was kind of like, hey, stop focusing on yourself. And I don't know if that's really the mentality that you want to have whenever, like, this girl is going to be the mother of the Messiah. Once again, if this were any other film, I think it's a fine way to start it because it allows room for character growth. And I think there was plenty of room for Mary to grow in other ways, but the Mary that we see at the beginning of the film just doesn't seem like the Mary that's described at the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew and the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, where like God is showing up to her and being like, hey, you're going to be the mother of Messiah because you are faithful, right? That was one issue I had with Mary. And with Joseph, I had total other issues with the characterization of Joseph. And fortunately, Mary actually addresses those concerns in the film. And so I don't have to spoil that for you, but there is going to be one interaction between Mary and Joseph near the beginning of the film where she basically calls him out on his questionable choices. And so I was glad that they at least called it out, but it still seems weird to me that he would act in the way that he was acting. Because once again, that runs kind of contrary to how we see him in the Gospels, right? And once again, keep in mind, we only read about Joseph in a very small portion of the Gospel accounts, right? We read about him at the very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, and the very beginning of the Gospel of Luke, and then Joseph is like gone from the picture, right? So we don't know much about Joseph, but the way that they chose to portray him, I understood what they were doing because once again, it's a very 21st century American approach to it, right? Because basically, once again, to not spoil things, it mainly revolves around how Mary and Joseph first interact in the film, right? The way that Joseph does things rings very true to what we would expect in a 21st century American romance movie, right? To where this is what we would expect our male protagonist to do. But is that how we would expect Joseph from the Bible to handle things? I don't think so. And I think it's exactly for the reasons that Mary calls him out on it later on. And so once you've seen the movie, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But I say all that because those were the things that I found questionable about the film, right? It was just the characterizations of Mary and Joseph at the very beginning because it really kind of turned me off of their characters more than it did like make me endeared to them. But that being said, the actor and actress playing Mary and Joseph did such a good job that even whenever I was questioning that, I was still enjoying the characters, right? I kind of just had to go into it accepting that these were fictionalized versions of these characters who were a little bit different than what we read about in the biblical account. And if you're okay with that, then you will enjoy the film just like I did. The second thing that I found kind of questionable, and I won't spend as long on this, is just the overall message of the film. And the reason I find it questionable is literally because I have a question about it because I don't know really what the overall story was trying to communicate, right? And once again, I'm not saying message in the sense of I needed a sermon preached at me. I'm not talking about like the Christian message here. I'm talking about like in any story, there's a beginning and an ending point, and there's got to be an overall, something has to have been communicated from the beginning to the end. And like I said, at the end, Mary does kind of have this voiceover where she kind of explains like a thing that has been taught from the beginning to the end, but I don't know if that's really the story that was being told. It's just almost like they were trying to wrap it up, right? And I don't think that's really their fault. I think it's mainly just the fact that they're trying to tell a historical story and they're ending the story in the place where in the gospel accounts, you're just at the beginning of the story, right? And so they had to kind of find a way to make this overall message work. I think I was just left confused as to what it was, right? With certain characters, there is definitely a message. Like Herod Antipas's character, I think there is a clear message, there was a clear story, like character arc for him, and I really liked that. But I think I was just left questioning what the overall story was from beginning to end, other than, hey, here's some biblical stuff and here's some songs to go throughout it, right? That being said, though, that is not really a gripe. It's more just me questioning it. And I think I might actually go see the movie again with some family members and friends. First off, because I want them to enjoy it like I did, so I can talk to them about it. But I think maybe rewatching it again, I'll be able to actually kind of grasp that a little bit more. But yeah, that being said, that is my review of Journey to Bethlehem. I have plenty more I could say, but I'd have to spoil things, and this video has already been long enough as it is. And so, that being said, I will turn the question to you. Have you seen Journey to Bethlehem? And if you haven't, when are you going to go see it? And if you're not going to go see it, why aren't you going to go see it? Because this was actually a really, really fun film. And if you didn't like the film, please comment below and let me know why not. And you know what? You might have a valid criticism, and that's totally okay. We don't have to have the same opinion, but I do want to know your opinions. And so definitely make sure to, in addition to liking this video, which I know you already did, because why wouldn't you do that for me? Go down in the comments and just let me know what you thought, right? If you disagree with me on stuff, that's fine. Let's talk about it. I think that's a good thing to do. I think disagreement can be healthy. And so let me know what you liked about the film, what you didn't like about the film. Tell me what your hot takes were. If you spoil anything, maybe just like put a little spoiler warning for people so that they can avoid it if they, don't want to see that. But I will hand it over to y'all now. Thank you so much for watching this video. My name is David Tate. This is Now Let's Be Honest. Be sure to keep a smile on your face and don't let anybody steal your joy. Remember who you are. And of course, Maranatha.